December 15th, 2023. Marcus Williams, now 32 years old and worth $85 million, was sitting in his penthouse office overlooking downtown Manhattan when his secretary buzzed him with news that would test everything he had become since being thrown away by his own family 15 years earlier. Mr. Williams, there are two people in the lobby claiming to be your parents. Security says they've been waiting outside the building for 3 hours in the rain. They look desperate. Sir, should I have them removed? Marcus's hands tightened around his coffee cup as he processed words he never thought he would hear. Richard and Patricia Williams, the people who had kicked him out of their mansion at 17 for being an embarrassment to their wealth, were now standing in the lobby of his corporate headquarters, soaking wet and begging to see the son they had disowned 15 years ago. The irony was overwhelming. The same parents who had told him he would never amount to anything without their money were now seeking help from the empire he had built with his own hands, starting from the streets where they had left him with nothing but a suitcase and their contempt. Marcus had fantasized about this moment for 15 years, the moment when a family who had valued their social reputation more than their own son would realize their devastating mistake. But now that it was actually happening, Marcus felt something he hadn't expected. Complete emptiness where his anger used to live. The boy who had cried himself to sleep on park benches, wondering why his own parents couldn't love him, was gone. In his place sat a man who had learned that the most powerful revenge isn't anger, it's indifference. And the people waiting in his lobby were about to discover that some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. Sir, his secretary asked again, what should I tell security? Marcus Williams looked out his floor-to-ceiling windows at the city he now owned a piece of, and made a decision that would either close the most painful chapter of his life or reopen wounds that had taken 15 years to heal. Before that devastating December night, when everything changed, Marcus Williams had grown up in what appeared to be the perfect wealthy family. The Williams mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, was featured in architectural magazines, and Richard Williams's investment firm managed portfolios for celebrities and Fortune 500 executives. Patricia Williams was a socialite whose charity galas were attended by governors and business moguls. But behind the facade of perfect wealth, the Williams family operated according to rules that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with maintaining their image of success. Marcus had learned early that his parents' approval was conditional on his ability to reflect well on their social status. The Williams name means something in this community, Richard would tell Marcus whenever he failed to meet expectations. Everything you do reflects on our family's reputation. You need to understand that you represent more than just yourself. Marcus had been enrolled in elite private schools, given expensive tutors, and provided with every material advantage money could buy. But emotional support, genuine affection, and unconditional love had been notably absent from his upbringing. His parents treated him more like an investment than a son, valuable only as long as he generated returns in the form of academic achievements, social connections, and behavior that enhanced their status. The first cracks in Marcus's relationship with his parents had appeared during his sophomore year of high school, where he began questioning the values that dominated their household. Marcus was intelligent, empathetic, and increasingly uncomfortable with his family's obsession with wealth and status at the expense of everything else. Why do we need 3 houses when there are homeless people sleeping outside our country club? Marcus had asked during a family dinner when he was 15, why do you spend more on mom's jewelry than most families earn in a year? Richard's response had been swift and cold. Marcus, you don't understand how the world works yet. We earned our wealth through hard work and smart decisions. We don't owe anyone explanations for how we spend our money. But Marcus's questions had continued and intensified as he grew older. He began volunteering at homeless shelters, tutoring underprivileged kids, and openly criticizing his parents' lavish spending while their communities struggled with poverty and inequality. You're embarrassing us, Patricia had told Marcus after he was photographed volunteering at a food bank. People in our social circle don't understand why our son is associating with those people. It reflects poorly on our family's values. The breaking point had come during Marcus's senior year of high school, when he announced that he wanted to study social work in college rather than business or finance like his father expected. Social work. Richard had laughed with genuine disgust. Marcus, social workers make $40,000 a year. We spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on your education. so you could take over my investment firm someday, not waste your life helping people who can't help themselves. Marcus's response had sealed his fate. Maybe the people who need help aren't the ones living in poverty, Dad. Maybe they're the ones so obsessed with money that they can't see the human cost of their greed. The words had been spoken in anger, but they had also been Marcus's genuine belief about his family's priorities. Richard and Patricia Williams had interpreted their son's criticism as the ultimate betrayal, not just of their values, but of their investment in his future. Marcus's parents were about to make a decision that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. But first, they would show their 17-year-old son exactly how conditional their love had always been, setting in motion a chain of events that would ultimately destroy everything they claimed to value most. The confrontation that ended Marcus Williams' childhood happened on a cold December night in 2008, during what should have been a celebration of his acceptance to Yale University with a partial scholarship. Marcus had been thrilled about the opportunity to attend one of the world's most prestigious universities, but his parents' reaction had been anything but celebratory. A partial scholarship? Patricia had said with disdain, "Marcus, we're millionaires. The fact that you applied for financial aid is humiliating. What will people think when they find out that Richard Williams' son needed charity to attend college? I applied for scholarship because I earned it based on my academic merit," Marcus had replied. "I thought you would be proud that I was recognized for my intelligence and hard work." But Richard's response had revealed the true nature of his disappointment. "Marcus, we've been planning for you to attend Yale since you were 10 years old. We've made donations to ensure your acceptance, and we've told everyone in our social circle about our son's Ivy League future. But we never expected you to associate our family name with need." The argument had escalated when Marcus announced that he intended to major in sociology and economics with focus on social justice, a combination that horrified his parents, who had assumed he would study business or finance in preparation for joining the family investment firm. "You're not going to Yale to study poverty," Richard had declared. "You're going to get a degree that prepares you for a successful career in business. If you want to help people, you can do charity work as a hobby after you've established yourself professionally." Marcus's refusal to compromise on his academic interests had triggered a reaction from his parents that revealed 15 years of conditional love and accumulated resentment about their son's character. "You're ungrateful," Patricia had screamed, her composure finally cracking. "We've given you everything: the best education, the finest clothes, opportunities that most children could never dream of, and you throw it all back in our faces by choosing to embarrass us with your bleeding heart nonsense. You've given me everything except parents who love me for who I am instead of what I can do for your reputation," Marcus had responded, his own anger finally boiling over. "I don't want your money if it comes with the requirement that I become someone I despise." Richard's response had been swift, final, and devastating. "Fine. If you don't want our money or our guidance, you can see how well you do without either. Pack your things and get out of our house. If you're so committed to helping the poor, you can see what it's like to be one of them." Within 2 hours, Marcus Williams had been stripped of his college fund, removed from his parents' health insurance, cut off from the family credit cards, and physically ejected from the only home he had ever known. His parents had given him exactly 30 minutes to pack what he could carry in 2 suitcases, and then they had locked the doors behind him. The last words Patricia Williams had spoken to her 17-year-old son were, "Don't come crawling back when you realize how hard life is without money and connections. You made your choice and we've made ours." Marcus's first night homeless would be the longest of his life, but it would also be the night he discovered a strength and determination that his privileged upbringing had never required him to develop. The boy who had been thrown away by his own family was about to prove that character matters more than capital. Marcus Williams spent his first night as a homeless teenager sitting on a bench in Greenwich train station, surrounded by his possessions, and trying to process the reality that his parents had actually followed through on their threat to disown him. The temperature was below freezing, and Marcus had never experienced physical discomfort that his family's wealth couldn't immediately solve. But even more devastating than the cold was the emotional realization that the people who had supposedly loved him for 17 years had been willing to throw him away the moment he refused to conform to their expectations. Marcus had always known his parents were demanding, but he had never imagined they would choose their social reputation over their own son's well-being. The practical challenges of homelessness hit Marcus immediately. He had no money except for the $247 in his checking account from a part-time job at a local bookstore. He had no place to sleep, no way to shower, and no plan for how to survive the winter without shelter. Most devastatingly, he had no family to turn for help. Richard and Patricia had effectively severed all ties to their extended families when they disowned Marcus. But Marcus had one advantage that most homeless teenagers lacked: an exceptional education and the intelligence to use it strategically. Instead of wallowing in self-pity or trying to reconcile with parents who had made their position clear, Marcus began making plans to not just survive, but to build a life that would prove his worth without their money or connections. Marcus's first decision was to defer his admission to Yale for 1 year while he figured out how to pay for college without his parents' financial support. He contacted the admissions office, explained the situation, and was connected with resources for students facing family rejection and financial hardship. There are more students in your situation than you might expect. The admissions counselor had told Marcus during a phone conversation that gave him hope for the first time since being kicked out. Students whose families withdraw support for various reasons, but who are determined to pursue their education anyway. We have programs to help students like you succeed. Marcus spent his first weeks homeless, sleeping in the train station, public libraries, and occasionally the homes of friends whose parents were horrified by Richard and Patricia's behavior. But he also spent those weeks applying for every job, scholarship, and assistance program he could find, determined to build financial independence as quickly as possible. Within a month, Marcus had found a job at a construction company that paid enough for him to rent a room in a boarding house. The work was physically demanding and completely different from the privileged life he had known, but also taught Marcus skills and work ethic that his elite education had never provided. Working construction was humbling and empowering at the same time. Marcus would later reflect, "I learned that I could survive without my parents' money, and I also learned that there were people in the world who judged me based on my character and work ethic rather than my family's bank account." Marcus's co-workers at the construction company became his chosen family, treating him with more genuine care and respect than his biological parents had ever shown. They taught him practical skills, helped him navigate life as an independent adult, and showed him what healthy relationships looked like. Marcus's transformation from privileged teenager to self-reliant adult would take years of sacrifice and determination. But the work ethic and resilience he developed while building his life from nothing would become the foundation for success that would eventually dwarf his parents' wealth. Marcus Williams spent the next 4 years building the foundation for a life that would eventually make his parents' wealth look modest by comparison. He worked construction during the day, took night classes at a community college, and saved every dollar he could toward his goal of transferring to a 4-year university. The physical and emotional challenges of supporting himself while pursuing his education were overwhelming at times. Marcus worked 40-hour weeks doing manual labor, then spent evenings studying accounting, economics, and business administration. He lived in a single room, ate ramen noodles most nights, and wore secondhand clothes while his former classmates from Greenwich were enjoying their freshman year at expensive colleges funded by their families. But Marcus's circumstances had also given him advantages that his privileged peers lacked. He understood the value of money because he had earned every dollar himself. He appreciated opportunities because he had worked for them rather than having them handed to him. Most importantly, he had developed an unshakable sense of self-worth that wasn't dependent on external validation or financial security. By age 21, Marcus had saved enough money to transfer to a state university where he could complete his bachelor's degree in business administration. His academic performance was exceptional, partly because he understood that education was his path to independence and success. Unlike his classmates who were attending college because it was expected of them, Marcus was there because he had fought for the opportunity. Marcus's professors recognized his exceptional motivation and intelligence, and several of them became mentors who helped him develop the business skills that would define his future career. Through internships and part-time work, Marcus gained experience in real estate investment, financial analysis, and business development while still completing his degree. The turning point in Marcus's financial journey came during his senior year of college, when he identified an undervalued commercial property that he believed had significant development potential. Using $15,000 he had saved from construction work and student loans, Marcus made his first real estate investment, a small office building that he renovated and leased to local businesses. The renovation project required Marcus to work nights and weekends for 6 months, doing much of the physical labor himself to minimize costs. But when the project was completed, the property was worth 3 times what he had paid for it, and the rental income provided him with financial security he had never experienced. That first property taught me that I could create wealth through intelligence, hard work, and calculated risk-taking, Marcus explained. I realized that I didn't need my parents' money or connections to build something valuable. I just needed to be willing to work harder than everyone else and make smarter decisions. Marcus's success with his first property led to additional real estate investments throughout his 20s. He reinvested every dollar of profit into new properties, gradually building a portfolio that generated enough passive income to support his transition from construction worker to full-time real estate developer. By age 28, Marcus owned 12 commercial properties worth over $8 million collectively. He had founded his own development company, employed 15 people, and was recognized as one of the most successful young entrepreneurs in his region. But Marcus's financial success was less important to him than the personal growth he had achieved during his years of independence. He had proven to himself that he could build a meaningful life based on his own values rather than his parents' expectations. Marcus's success would eventually catch the attention of the social circle that had once included his parents. But the news of their disowned son's accomplishments would reach Richard and Patricia Williams at a time when their own world was falling apart, setting the stage for a reckoning 15 years in the making. By 2020, Marcus Williams had built a real estate empire worth over $50 million. But his success had come at a personal cost that he was only beginning to understand. He had spent 12 years since being kicked out focused entirely on building wealth and proving his independence, but had also isolated himself emotionally from relationships that might have provided the love and connection his family had denied him. Marcus's romantic relationships had been casual and temporary, partly because he struggled to trust people's motives after being rejected by his own parents. His friendships were professional rather than personal, and he had never allowed himself to be vulnerable with anyone about the emotional trauma of being disowned by his family. I had built financial security, but I had also built emotional walls that kept me safe from being hurt again. Marcus would later reflect, I was successful, but I was also lonely in ways that I didn't fully understand or acknowledge. Marcus's isolation was interrupted in 2021 when he began dating Dr. Sarah Martinez, a pediatrician who worked with underprivileged children and who shared Marcus's commitment to social justice. Sarah was the first person Marcus had met who seemed genuinely unimpressed by his wealth and more interested in his character and values. Sarah saw through my financial success to the person I had become underneath, Marcus explained. She appreciated that I had built something meaningful from nothing, but she also challenged me to address the emotional damage that my family's rejection had caused. Through his relationship with Sarah, Marcus began to confront the anger and hurt he had been carrying for over a decade. He started therapy, began volunteering with organizations that helped young people facing family rejection, and slowly learned to open himself to the possibility of love and connection that didn't come with conditions. Meanwhile, Richard and Patricia Williams were experiencing their own crisis that would eventually bring them to Marcus's office lobby, desperate for help from the son they had thrown away. Richard's investment firm had been devastated by a combination of poor decisions, market downturns, and a fraud investigation that had resulted in significant legal fees and financial penalties. By 2022, the Williams family had lost most of their wealth, been forced to sell their mansion, and were facing the possibility of bankruptcy. Patricia's health had also declined significantly. She had been diagnosed with early-stage dementia, and her medical care was expensive and not fully covered by their reduced insurance. The couple who had once lived in luxury were now struggling with basic expenses and facing the prospect of losing everything they had spent decades accumulating. The final blow to their remaining pride came when mutual acquaintances began telling Richard and Patricia about their son's extraordinary success. The social circle that had once whispered about Marcus's estrangement from his family was now buzzing with news about the disowned Williams son, who had become one of the region's most successful real estate developers. People started asking us why we weren't proud of Marcus's accomplishments. Patricia would later admit, We realized that everyone knew he was our son, and they were confused about why we weren't bragging about his success like other parents do. Richard and Patricia Williams spent months debating whether to contact the son they had disowned 15 years earlier. Their pride war with their desperation, but eventually their circumstances became so dire that swallowing their pride seemed like their only option for survival. The moment Marcus had fantasized about for 15 years was finally happening, but the reality of seeing his parents reduced to begging would test everything he had learned about forgiveness, justice, and the difference between revenge and healing. Marcus Williams stared at his office window for 10 minutes after learning that his parents were waiting in the lobby, trying to process emotions he hadn't felt since the night they kicked him out of their mansion. The anger he expected to feel was there, but it was overshadowed by something he hadn't anticipated: complete indifference to their suffering. The boy who had cried himself to sleep wondering why his parents couldn't love him was gone, replaced by a man who had learned to love himself without their validation. The teenager who had desperately wanted their approval had evolved into someone who no longer needed their recognition to know his worth. "Send them up," Marcus finally told his secretary. "But give me 5 minutes to prepare." Marcus used those 5 minutes to center himself emotionally and remind himself of who he had become during their 15 years apart. He was no longer the 17-year-old boy they had rejected. He was a successful businessman, a loving partner to Sarah, and someone who had built a life based on his own values rather than their expectations. When Richard and Patricia Williams walked into Marcus's office, the contrast between their current circumstances and his obvious success was stark and devastating. The parents who had once dismissed him as worthless were now clearly struggling financially, while their disowned son occupied a corner office that cost more per month than most people earned in a year. Richard looked older, grayer, and significantly less confident than the man who had once wielded his wealth like a weapon against his own son. Patricia seemed frail and confused, showing signs of dementia that was slowly stealing her memories and independence. "Marcus," Richard said quietly, his voice lacking the authority and contempt that had characterized their last conversation 15 years earlier. "Thank you for agreeing to see us." Marcus gestured for them to sit down, but he remained standing behind his desk, a power dynamic that made it clear who was in control of this conversation. "What can I do for you?" Marcus asked, his tone professionally polite but emotionally distant. The question hung in the air as Richard and Patricia struggled to find words that could bridge 15 years of separation and mutual resentment. They had clearly prepared speeches about reconciliation and family forgiveness, but Marcus's composed indifference was making it difficult for them to deliver their plan, please. "We've made mistakes," Patricia finally said, tears streaming down her face. "We were wrong to kick you out. We were wrong to cut you off from the family. We spent 15 years regretting our decision, and we want to make amends." Marcus's response was swift and devastating in its calmness. "I appreciate your regret, but I'm not sure what you expect me to do with it now. You made your choice 15 years ago, and I've made mine since then." Richard tried a different approach. "Marcus, we know we don't deserve forgiveness, but we're family. We're your parents, and we love you. You're the people who gave birth to me and raised me for 17 years. Marcus corrected. "But parents don't kick their children out for having different values. Parents don't choose their social reputation over their son's well-being. You stopped being my parents the night you threw me away." The conversation continued for another hour, with Richard and Patricia alternating between apologies, explanations, and increasingly desperate pleas for financial help with Patricia's medical care and their mounting debts. Marcus listened to their requests with the same professional attention he gave to business proposals, but his response would teach them that some consequences are permanent and some bridges cannot be rebuilt. Marcus Williams had spent 15 years imagining what he would say to his parents if they ever tried to reconcile with him, but the reality of their desperation had eliminated his desire for dramatic confrontations or emotional catharsis. Instead, he felt something more powerful than anger: complete control over a situation where they had once held all the power. "I understand that you're facing financial difficulties," Marcus said after listening to their requests for help with medical bills and living expenses. "I also understand that you've realized your son is financially capable of helping you. But I need you to understand something important about the man you're asking for help." Richard and Patricia leaned forward, hoping that Marcus's words indicated willingness to provide assistance, But his next statement would shatter their remaining hope. The 17-year-old boy you kicked out died on that park bench 15 years ago. He died from heartbreak, rejection, and the devastating realization that his own parents valued their reputation more than his life. The man sitting across from you now was built from that boy's ashes, and he doesn't owe you anything. Patricia began sobbing, while Richard's face showed the dawning realization that their son's success hadn't made him more forgiving. It had made him more powerful and less needful of their approval. "Marcus, please," Richard begged. "We know we failed as parents. We know we made terrible mistakes. But we're desperate. Your mother's medical bills are destroying us financially, and we don't have anywhere else to turn." Marcus's response was delivered with the calm authority of someone who had learned to make decisions based on principles rather than emotions. You're not desperate because of circumstances beyond your control. You're desperate because of choices you made throughout your lives, prioritizing wealth over relationships, status over character, and image over integrity. The consequences you're facing now are the natural result of the values you chose to live by. Marcus stood up from his desk and walked to his window, looking out at the city where he had built his empire from nothing while his parents lived in luxury and comfort. "I'm going to make you an offer," Marcus said without turning around. "But it's not the offer you came here hoping for." He turned back to face his parents, and his next words would define the final chapter of their relationship forever. "I will pay for your mother's medical care for the next year. I will ensure that you have basic housing and food security. But this assistance comes with conditions that are non-negotiable." Richard and Patricia nodded eagerly, willing to accept any terms that would provide financial relief. But Marcus's conditions were designed to teach them lessons about humility, accountability, and the consequences of their choices. First, you will publicly acknowledge that you disowned me for having different values than yours, and that my success was achieved without your help or support. Second, you will volunteer at organizations that help homeless teenagers, particularly those facing family rejection. Third, you will attend family therapy with me for 1 year to address the damage your choices caused. And finally, Marcus continued, you'll understand that this assistance is not about reconciliation or rebuilding our relationship. It's about me choosing to be a better person than you were to me, even though you don't deserve my compassion. Richard and Patricia agreed to Marcus's conditions, but their son's final statement made it clear that forgiveness and financial assistance were not the same thing. "I'm helping you because it aligns with my values, not because I forgive you or consider you family again. You taught me that love should be unconditional, but you failed to provide it. I'm providing unconditional assistance to demonstrate the principle you failed to live by." Marcus's decision to help his parents while maintaining emotional boundaries became a model for other people facing similar family betrayals. He had chosen compassion over revenge, but he had also chosen self-preservation over reconciliation. 6 months after their meeting, Richard and Patricia were living in a modest apartment paid for by Marcus's charity, volunteering at homeless shelters, and attending therapy sessions where they were forced to confront the impact of their parenting choices. But Marcus maintained minimal contact with them, focused instead on building a life with Sarah and supporting young people who face family rejection. "I learned that helping people doesn't require forgiving them," Marcus reflected. "I can choose to be generous without choosing to be vulnerable. I can provide assistance without providing access to my heart." Marcus Williams proved that the ultimate revenge isn't cruelty. It's becoming so successful and emotionally healthy that your betrayer's opinions become irrelevant to your happiness. His story inspired thousands of people who have been rejected by their families to focus on building their own success rather than seeking approval from people who had proven themselves unworthy of giving it. If Marcus's story of transformation and controlled compassion has moved you, take a moment to like this video and share with others who need to remember that being rejected by the wrong people is actually a gift that frees you to become who you're meant to be. Subscribe for more incredible stories of people who turn their deepest pain into their greatest power, and comment about your own experiences of rising above family rejection. Remember, your worth isn't determined by other people's ability to recognize it.